Hello, wonderful people. Welcome to the More Feelings, Less Stress podcast.
Thanks a million for pressing play. I'm Mary Allen and I'm a life coach.
And I'm Anirban and I'm a meditation teacher.
We're on a mission to slay our stress by being more emotional.
And yes, that includes me getting all emotional too.
If you listen along, emotional flexibility can become one of your happiness habits.
And we'll be teaching you the emotional life skills that I never learnt at school.
We're not afraid to be honest and vulnerable. So expect lots of chats about failing and flourishing, as well as all the feels.
We really hope you enjoy today's episode.
And this week we are going to dive deep into guilt and also a little bit of shame in there too.
Yeah, so guilt, the G is part of our acronym for what we call grey skies, and that's one of our practice cards from our card pack.
So grey skies is really interesting because we tend to separate emotions into positive and negative emotions, good and bad. I feel good, I feel bad. This is what we have grown up doing, although it's actually not very useful for us, to be honest. And that's why our grey skies card is the color of a rainbow, because we really need to be able to embrace all emotions. Open up the door for all of them. There's no good or bad. Some of them make us feel more uncomfortable than comfortable, but that's really got to do with our conditioning, how we've grown up. We were permitted to maybe feel certain feelings at home and others not. So really, all feelings are good, all feelings are valid. Okay, so let's get right down to what exactly is guilt. Anirban, what would you say guilt is?
It's hard for me to describe, but guilt is that guilty feeling. I've done something wrong, something was my fault, and kind of a bit of blame on myself.
Yeah, that's pretty good actually. It is definitely feeling we've done something wrong. And then, under the surface of that, a much more tricky emotion, which is often confused with guilt, is shame. And that's like that you're not good enough. Actually, guilt can be good for us. Did you know that?
Yes, I've heard this. So how do we use it in a positive way?
Yeah, so really guilt is actually, we want to set things right. We maybe want to change our behavior. Yes, it's psychologically uncomfortable, but it's often helpful, right? And psychologists call this cognitive dissonance. And actually, it's what drives us to change. So things that I have felt guilty about recently have been not going to the gym, not calling back a friend, not listening intentionally to my daughter as she told me another long, drawn-out story about the friendships at school. So all of those things are actually things that maybe I want to do better. So actually, it's okay for me to feel a little bit guilty. Tomorrow I will go to the gym. When I pick my child up from nursery today, not nursery, school, sorry. She's all grown up now. She's 10.
God, yeah.
I will actually maybe make an effort to really have my phone switched off and listen to her. So yeah, guilt is like a little bit of obligation. It can be quite good for us.
And what about shame? How is shame different from guilt? Because they kind of tend to go hand in hand sometimes, or people often confuse the two. I certainly do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things is that shame is the birthplace of perfectionism.
Ooh, that's good.
It's beautiful. Brène said this, and actually, just to let you guys know, we'll put this in the notes, but her amazing book called Atlas of the Heart is where a lot of the information that I have learned has come from. And also another fabulous lady called Manuela Bolton, and she designed these beautiful thing called Feeling Magnets and a motion coach course, which I did about 5 years ago. So just that'll be in the notes below the podcast. So actually, shame is not great for us because perfectionism is very self-destructive, and perfectionism is actually not self-improvement at all. So I'm not good enough. I see guilt and shame as guilt being something kind of outside of me, I feel guilty because I forgot to go to the gym. It's something, it was my action outside of me. Shame is very internal, like I'm a bad person because I didn't go to the gym. It goes much deeper and it's much more destructive.
That self-talk, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of that negative self-taught. Absolutely. Unfortunately, shame is highly correlated with addiction, violence, aggression, depression, eating disorders, and bullying. And by highly correlated, I just mean it kind of goes hand in hand with it. This is not the case for guilt, actually. Guilt doesn't lead to these outcomes.
So quite different, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely. So I think that's the best way of separating it out, and just check in with yourself. Shame is very egocentric. It's very self-involved. You really think about other people's view of you.
Right.
It's all of that. It's much more draining.
Yeah. What would other people think?
Yes.
Yeah. Which I'm sure a lot of us have, right?
Well, particularly now with online, right? Perception.
Well, yeah. Putting it out there, broadcasting to the world.
And then we also have tied in here to this mix. We have embarrassment. We're all know what embarrassment is. You can feel exposed. You feel flustered. You feel clumsy. But embarrassment goes quite quickly. It's just that, self-conscious ability where we understand other people are looking at us. But it passes quite quickly. I think the blush, I'm a great blusher.
Oh, yeah.
That's really embarrassment. And again, it goes away quite quickly. Shame is something that remains,
Yeah, you kind of hold it a bit deeper within. You don't necessarily talk about it, shall we say?
Yeah. I think it's something fundamentally a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
So when we feel ashamed, you'll also notice that you might do these things. You might avoid someone. You might want to disappear. You might stare at the floor. You might pretend. You might want to apologize, hide, slump, or be defensive, which is a very interesting one. So any of those things, if you feel compelled to act in that way, then we're talking about maybe guilt or shame. So hopefully we've been able to kind of extrapolate the two of them for you.
Yeah.
And the whole purpose of this podcast is not to judge yourself, not to beat yourself up. And actually shame comes with a lot of that negative self-talk. So what we're really trying to do here is actually permit you to spend a little bit of time to sit in silence and just check in with your feelings. We have a beautiful feelings cheat sheet that's up on our Insta page, which you can check out. And so really you're just trying to understand, I'm confused about what I feel. Just try and think about it, and kind of notice yourself. And the more you check in, the more you'll start to realize which of the feelings you're actually feeling. Because an awful lot of us are kind of moving through life on autopilot, and by not noticing our feelings, we let them build up. And I don't know if you have ever been in a relationship where this happened, where I think all of us probably have actually, is that, nothing is said, everything is pushed out, and then the enormous explosion, usually in anger,
rage, or some sort of outburst.
Even my wonderful mother, may she rest in peace, she was definitely keep calm and carry on type of a lady, and she was in her 80s when she died recently. And she was so never complained, got on with things, just like our beautiful queen who also died recently. And to be honest with you, then she would explode, so it would come out eventually. So
reaches boiling point or bursting point, right?
Yeah. So we're trying to do the antithesis of this here on this podcast.
You beat it to the boiling point, as in you pop the pressure cap off way before it reaches boiling point, right?
So what I like to say is feel it to reveal it. So, it's really good to actually put a label on your emotions, and it's really good to name them. But I would go one step deeper. Sit in silence and just just feel it. I know it's scary. I know it's uncomfortable, but nothing is permanent, especially your feelings. They're temporary. Absolutely. And actually they will pass.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you experience of that, Anirban, you could share with us?
Well, yeah, here we go. So, I mean, I obviously have feelings, but over the years,
no way.
A
man has feelings.
Correct. Over the years, expressing my feelings is not a normal thing for me to do, or wasn't a normal thing for me to do growing up. Absolutely not acceptable in the 80s and 90s in my school and my upbringing. Certainly not part of my cultural background, coming from an Indian immigrant family. When I think about it, those feeling words, I'm bilingual, I speak and understand Bengali fluently, but the word guilty in Bengali was like, I just didn't know what it was. I'd never heard it spoken. Shame I did. I knew the word for shame, which is lodja.
Lodja.
Yeah, because, Mum would sometimes say it jokingly, like, don't you feel embarrassed? Don't you feel a bit ashamed of that?
Oh, so she would say it to you, not about herself.
Yeah, maybe.
You often judge other people.
But the word,
shame on you.
Yeah, the word for guilt, I had to actually Google it because I genuinely didn't even know it, is aparadabosh. So I was like, never heard that one.
Say it again for me, Anirban.
Aparadabosh. I'm not even sure if I'm saying it right. Probably not, because like I said, I don't hear that very often. In fact, never. So maybe it's more of a classical word. Maybe it's got, I don't know. It's just not familiar to me. Maybe it is to my, my parents obviously know what it is. And in fact, I better check with them how you actually pronounce it. But it's so interesting that I didn't even know that word. So yeah, that's part of the reason why it wouldn't have been part of my vocabulary. And I always say that, being able to express your emotions is like learning a new language. It's literally, what are the words you need to be able to say how you feel?
Absolutely. And that's what we consider this podcast to be, like an emotional encyclopedia. I think of all the learning and the training tools that our daughter has. She's 10 at school. She comes home with like maths tables, like all of those like hacks that she has, spelling, everything.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be amazing if she came home with like, our feelings cheat sheet from school?
Yeah, feelings words.
Yeah. So it's very, very interesting culturally. So I would love you to, Anirban, tonight share with us actually your experiences of guilt and shame. And I'm definitely letting Anirban as the man lead this, because as a woman, I could probably take up this whole podcast on guilt, mother's guilt, etc., etc. But I'm really purposely on these podcasts trying to stay a little bit quieter and let, our resident man fill the airwaves with his feelings.
Great. So I actually don't feel very comfortable doing this. It's not something I like to do. I certainly don't feel great knowing that this is going to be created and put out there as a podcast. But anyway, I will share some of my experiences with you. And one of them that scorched into my brain because it was such a big deal at the time is when I was a child. And I remember it very specifically because the incident happened on my 11th birthday. And I was having a birthday party at my house that very day. Now, the morning of that birthday, I got a letter in the post that said I hadn't passed the entrance exam for getting into the same school as my brother, which was MGS, Manchester Grammar School, which is quite a well-known private school up in Manchester. And I know it doesn't sound like much, but it was a really big deal. The problem was it was kind of a foregone conclusion that I'd get in. It was kind of, oh yeah, people weren't even expecting me not to get in type thing. Because, my grades were really good. I was a conscientious student and everything. But when I got the letter, it said, no, sorry, you haven't passed the exam. I felt incredibly low and guilty and ashamed. All of them kind of. It was a massive bundle of emotion. I couldn't name them at the time.
And if I was to delve deeper there, I go back to our perfectionist piece from Brène. And, she says perfectionism at its core is about trying to earn approval and acceptance.
Oh, yeah.
Most perfectionists were raised being praised for achievement, performance, good grades, good manners, nice appearance, rule following, people pleasing, all of that stuff. So is that something when you hear that perfectionism and shame piece that you can really relate to now?
God, absolutely. And perfectionism. Sadly, I have an older brother who was already put on that pedestal. He was a super straight A student, and I was always sort of, playing catch up and trying to achieve the same sort of standard, should we say? So absolutely, those words ring true for me.
So it was probably a case of shame then that you're not good enough.
Yes, yes. But then a bit guilty that I'd let the family down type thing as well, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was certainly, like I said, it was a mixture of a whole whirlwind of emotions, you know? Angry that I'd let myself down almost. And then, you know, my friends came to the birthday party that afternoon, and a couple of the lads had got the letters and had got in, and I basically lied to them and say, oh no, I hadn't got my letter yet, because I was ashamed to tell them that
And whose idea was that? Was that your idea not to tell anyone, or was that your parents?
Probably. I'm sure they said don't tell anyone type thing, but I didn't want to tell anyone myself anyway. So yeah, it was that's something, you know, it stuck with me. I'm pretty, you know, I hated having to tell people. Obviously eventually people found out. I ended up going to a different school, but yeah, it was, you know, I call that my sort of emotional trauma at a very young age, because you know, it totally changed the I guess the trajectory of my upbringing there.
Absolutely, yeah.
But anyway, I'll give you another very quick one.
Oh, now he started. We can't stop him. Yeah. This is great. Keep going.
So this is much more recently. I say recently, it's still a few years ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago now. And I had pretty similar feelings when I got fired from my last corporate job. And this wasn't being made redundant. This was literally a classic call up with my manager and my sort of UK boss, who said, let's meet in for a coffee, and sat me down and basically said, sorry, and it's not working out. Those were literally the words they said. And this was for a small US tech startup I was working for. I'd been there almost 12 months, and they basically said, yeah, pack up your stuff, leave your computer and the phone on the desk, don't come back. And the problem with this was it was really unexpected. They hadn't given me any sort of, you know, verbal warnings or written anything beforehand to say, you know, we're not happy with your performance or anything. It was like sprung on me, so it totally caught me off guard. I hadn't prepped for it, you know, mentally, shall we say. And really, I just felt, I think, you know, my first feelings were guilty that I'd let myself down, that I hadn't, you know, come up to the mark, hadn't performed, so to speak, you know, high performance and all that. And I guess, you know, having to come home and tell my family that I'd lost my job and have been fired again, because it's not the first time that's happened. So it was, it was really hard for me.
I actually remember this, Anirban. I remember what you said to me. It's funny how something is kind of seared in your memory. Like you say, you actually said to me, I am sorry for letting you down.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
And I didn't think you'd let me down at all. I mean, you know, people get fired all the time, you know. But then I am quite anti-perfectionist, you know. It's something that I have always tried to disrupt, you know. And it's like, you know, we fail all the time, and that's okay. Failure is actually brilliant.
Oh yeah, don't I know it? And
but you know, I think you've embraced that much more now than maybe you would have before. Because I think for men, it's even harder to embrace failure.
It really was. You know, I felt, you know, I wasn't good at my job. We'd have to struggle for a while financially while I look for a new job, or, you know, all the classic things that go on once you sort of lose your employment. But you know.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think, you know, this is She More to Feel More podcast, and, you know, there's a little extra piece that you can listen to about She More if you want to. And in that, I talk about this idea of men feeling more and failing more in order to flourish, right?
Yeah.
Because I think fear of failure is what stops men from feeling, actually, you know.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, I can't agree more. Because there's definitely that before I, you know, took a different trajectory, so we say, and then went all out into, you know, setting up our own business, which is the, you know, one of the great risks, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, just goes to show you that, you know, worst case scenario has actually led you to the happiest days of your life, right?
Absolutely.
That's why we don't feel failure. So it's interesting. I think, like we're saying, these are very entangled shame and guilt. And I think, you know, only by sitting by yourself, maybe you can kind of figure out which which is which. Personally, you know, I've been in a real deep dive into emotions, certainly over the last 5 years. And for me, I find the guilt is the one that sits on top of me most of the time. I get, you know, I'm a normal person. I feel guilty. Like I was saying, I'm a mum, you know, and I feel guilty. I look around as we record this, the mess of our house, you know, and you feel guilty about everything. But I think what's really interesting when you stop being an autopilot is that you can see the feeling, okay? Even some actual therapists recommend you picture it as a color or maybe even as an animated character, right? But for me, I see the feeling as almost like a hole in the ground in a pothole. And I see guilt and I can say hello to it. I don't have to pretend it doesn't exist. Yes, I feel guilt. Guilt is a normal human emotion to feel. I almost say to it, hello, guilt. I see you there. I recognize you. What are you trying to tell me? Okay, maybe you're trying to tell me a message that actually I need to be a little bit more attentive to my child. She's going through a particularly difficult time at the moment. She's a sensitive child. Let's zone in. Maybe you're telling me, you know what? You haven't gone to the gym this week and you love going, or go ahead. So I can see the guilt. I can take its message because ultimately, like we said in the intro, that emotions are really information for us. And we're so obsessed with information now. And like, you know, we're online getting all the data on everything, you know, the algorithm, the analysis.
Data is the new gold, or whatever you want to call it, oil or something.
And I think like really the greatest data that we have are feelings. So, you know, when you start to feel this somewhere in your body, it's giving you a signal, you know, and embracing the grey skies is actually, okay, what's going on here? And so guilt for me is a good one. As I say, if you're getting to a deeper level of shame, then it might take a little bit more investigation and you have to think about, okay, I think perfection is a really good one. Are my standards too high?
Yeah.
Do I expect too much of myself? And years back, I remember seeing a beautiful postcard that says, you know, I am good enough.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
And so again, it's back to that, you know, like I now also say with the mess of my home, I reframe it and I go, I am grateful for the mess makers. So, you know, an awful lot of this podcast is kind of about not being lonely, and we are lonely in a crowd, in a room, in a family, in a relationship if we don't express our true feelings, right?
I just wanted to add basically that we undervalue the data of our feelings. You know, we don't place enough value on them. It's really important, basically, is what the conclusion that we've gone to, right?
Yeah. And I was just going to say there, to keep going my train of thought, that often, you know, you could have a perfect home, it could be spotless, and you still see these Instagram profiles. They just kill me, like these middle class and upper class lives, and they're literally like the cleanest kitchen ever, you know, beautiful flowers, food that's like from a restaurant. I mean, it's ridiculous if you're making food at home like that every night. Wow, etc., etc. And to me, it's like, right, but like I want a life where I'm connected. So I am grateful for the mess, and I have lowered my standards across absolutely every area of my life. I look down at my nails and I've got black nail varnish on, and it's chipped from Download Festival that we've been to. So like, you know, the anti-perfectionism piece is probably really important when we talk about shame. You know, where can you lower your standard?
Yes. Yeah. What are you okay with? Yeah. Brilliant.
But sitting with however you're feeling is definitely a big one. I think the other thing I was thinking about was kids and shame. So I think, you know, it was interesting you were saying about your parents. Sometimes we judge other people and we try to shame them, you know.
Oh yeah, we all heard about, you know, people shaming, whatever, various types of shaming.
I was thinking about Game of Thrones there.
What?
The shaming in Game of Thrones.
Oh, the bell. Shame bell. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we do shame other people. And I think it's one to be very careful for all the parents out there that you don't shame your child. So, you know, if we haven't grown up with being okay with feelings, then we can make somebody else feel very bad about the feeling they're feeling. Don't cry, or in front of somebody, how dare you do this, or whatever.
Yeah, how dare you embarrass me in front of everyone? That's a classic, right?
So hang on a second, is this your feeling or is the child child's feelings. So it all gets a bit mushy and, a bit intertwined. And so I've seen this happen, where at birthday parties, a child does something that's perceived as wrong or expresses some feeling that they don't like, and they are shamed for that. So I think that's one to kind of keep an eye on as well. And if you notice you do that, again, sit in silence alone and just check in with yourself and you go, where's that coming from? So it could be coming from your past or whatever. So this very nicely leads me into my little Gaeilge bit, my Irish bit. So I have found that the more I go back to my mother tongue, which is Irish, the better I feel. And I've got a beautiful Irish saying for you today. It actually means the day of the rain is not the day of children. So really that we don't want to be bringing all that negativity down on our children too young. Children should be children. So it's ni hé lá na bashti lá na bashti. So ni hé lá na bashti lá na bashti, which is just basically the day of the rain is not of the children. And nice. So really we don't want to burden them with our guilt and our shame.
Got it. Brilliant. It's lovely.
And then within the Irish language, we have the word for guilt is cínteachas.
Cínteachas. Okay, that's a good one.
Cínteachas, yeah. And we say tá cínteachas orm. So interestingly, in the Irish language, the feelings are on top of us. So they're not. I kind of like that. No. Right. And I almost feel like that's a positive.
So you say, I feel this on me.
On me. It's upon you.
Right.
On you. I quite like that because in my mind, I think if it's upon me, it can also be off me.
Yeah, you can brush it off.
Slide off.
Versus where it's in you,
yes.
How do you feel on the inside?
So
it's harder
really
to remove, should we say.
That's anyway, how we say
great.
It, yeah.
Nice.
The Irish word for regret, which is kind of tied into guilt as well, is méadachán. So you would say tá méadachán orm. And then another word that I stumbled across when I was looking into this, which a bit like you were saying in Bengali, I didn't always know those words. I remember learning the word ufásach really young.
Right. And that means?
Or ufás. And that means terrible or horrible. Ooh. And it's kind of like, it's like a generic catch-all phrase like crap or whatever, bad, right? Yeah. And I wanted to see if anyone out there remembers this, where tá sé ufásach was the catchphrase of an absolutely hilarious Irish puppet called Bosco.
Okay, I'm 80s. Not familiar.
And weirdly, I kind of look a little bit like Bosco now, which is a bit weird. He's got bright red hair, bright red cheeks.
Okay, that's the first thing I'm Googling now.
Talks a lot. But tá sé ufásach. Okay. So that was like, it's awful. And that was like one that I feel, it's terrible, right? The guilt, the shame, the shame. It's a terrible thing. Tá sé ufásach. Sounds quite nice, doesn't it?
Brilliant.
Want to give it a go on her, man?
Tá sé ufásach. Is that right?
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Not bad.
Yeah. Great. So that's kind of the Irish words. And then the one Irish thing I wanted to end on today was actually a really beautiful proverb again. And it is Ní bhíonn an rá ach mara bhíonn an smacht.
Okay, translate.
And this means there's basically no prosperity without discipline.
Ooh, okay, yeah.
So
brilliant.
I like to think of this, the holistic psychologist who's pretty famous on Insta now, Dr. Nicola LaPerre, whose book, Do the Work, I have loved. And so that to me is how I would like to end today. It's basically do the work.
Yeah. You got to do the work on yourself.
Yeah, so like this is going to be really tricky if you're new to feelings.
This is, for me, it's been a process. It's been years to be able to bring myself to say these emotions out loud, and certainly years to be able to put it out there online. So it takes work, but it's totally doable. Practice.
Yeah, and I think there's that horrible saying of practice makes perfect. We're not going to go with that. We're going to go repeat. Or our major catchphrase, which is sticky, sweet, repeat. So, make it as sticky as possible, as repetitive as possible, and actually just keep leaning into it. Yeah. And next week on the podcast, we'll actually do maybe what could be known as a sweet emotion or a positive emotion from our So Brilliant Habits card. So each week we're going to mix it up. 1 week, what would be traditionally called a negative, and the following week, what would be traditionally called a positive emotion. But we're trying and not to use those labels because all emotions are messengers, are data.
All acceptable.
Absolutely.
That's it. So let's wrap up our week 1, and we'll hopefully make this a weekly thing. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and listen to us again for more insights on your feelings.
Remember to see more, to feel more. Slán go fóill.
Namaskar.